In the late afternoon, when the shadows had stretched long across the dust-blown edge of the Tsavo borderlands, the goats stopped moving, their hooves stilled mid-step, frozen in a line like stones along a dry riverbed. The air was brittle, cracked with heat, and nothing stirred but the soft, confused shift of their ears. A boy no older than 10 stood barefoot on the ridge of a worn path, clutching a crooked stick that had once been longer than he was. He squinted into the open space ahead. That's when he saw it. The lion was already there, not running, not crouching, just standing, right in the open, as if it had walked into the day by mistake. Its coat was dulled, scorched by sun and stripped of shine. Its ribs pushed out like the bones of an old collapsed shelter. The mane was thin and uneven, clinging to patches of skin around a hollow face. It blinked once, slowly, then lowered its head a fraction. The goats didn't scatter. They didn't bolt. They simply stared, their bodies tense but unmoving, as if some part of them understood. The boy didn't yell. He didn't run, either. He took one step back into the thorn shadows behind him and waited, breath held in the space between fear and wonder. He had seen lions before, from a distance, or on the other side of warnings. But never like this. Never one so close and so quiet. The wind shifted, carrying the heat sideways in a low sigh through the scrub. Dust lifted, swirled, then settled again around the lion's paws. One leg twitched beneath the weight of standing. It took a step forward, not toward the herd, but sideways as if unsure of the ground. Then another step, slower. It reached the edge of the grazing circle where 2 goats flinched but held their place. The lion stopped. It didn't growl. Its jaws never parted. Closer now, its face came into clarity. There were flies near the eyes. A dark line traced along its jaw, the edge of a wound half-healed and still raw. Its mouth sagged slightly open, not in a threat, but in exhaustion. The boy saw the tongue, cracked and pale, flicking out once like it had forgotten what to do. The goats backed into each other, forming a scattered clump. One bleated, soft and unsure. The lion's ears turned, then drooped. Another step forward, and it passed through them. Not with force, not with intention, just passed. It moved like water around stones, slow and heavy. One goat sidestepped. Another stared into the lion's side, unmoving. There was no panic, only confusion. A living question in the dust. The boy took 3 slow steps backward, stick still in hand. From the ridge, one of the village elders had begun to shout his name, the call thin and stretched over wind. He didn't answer. The lion swayed now, its head low, mouth slack. Its tail didn't move. No twitch of warning, no lift of defense. It stood in the center of the herd as if it had walked there by accident, or because there was nowhere else left. From behind the goat line, 2 men appeared, shouldering long staffs. Not weapons, just the tools they used for driving cattle and drawing boundary lines. One of them lifted a hand and the boy came to his side. Quiet words were exchanged, but no one moved toward the lion. Not yet. The older man squinted. "It's not here to eat," he said, almost to himself. The lion turned its head, looking not at them, but past them, toward nothing visible. Then it dropped its haunches suddenly, like the ground had given way. Dust lifted around it. It sat there, bones sharp beneath skin, breathing in long, hollow pulses. From this angle, they saw its shoulder, the matted fur, the puckered flesh. A limp now obvious. It was not a hunter, it was barely whole. More goats began to shuffle back, their instincts catching up to what their eyes hadn't believed. The lion didn't follow. It just lowered its head further until it hung like a fallen fruit. Its tail dragged once behind it, then stilled. The sun leaned hard into the hills. A silence spread, one not of peace, but of waiting, the kind that only comes when something sacred or dying is in the open. A herder took off his hat and held it to his chest. The boy reached for the hem of his shirt, clutched it tight. When the lion lay down, it did so with the weight of surrender. Front legs folded beneath its frame, ribs lifting and falling like cloth in weak wind. A breeze carried the smell of dry blood and old earth. It blinked one last time, and its eyes closed. No charge, no sound, just a lion too thin to stand, too tired to fear, resting where it shouldn't have reached. A herd of goats around him, a boy watching. And somewhere in the space between them, something unspoken passed. Not survival, not death. Just a moment no one had seen before. The dust rose gently once more as the breeze shifted again, trailing behind the lion's still body, curling around the quiet feet of the herd, and vanishing down the red path toward the riverbed. The rangers came in the still heat of early evening, their boots soft in the dust, their voices low and few. News of the lion had moved quickly, not because of danger, but because it had done nothing. It had stood in the middle of a goat herd and collapsed. No chase, no roar, just the sound of bones folding under a dry sky. They found him near the edge of the field, not far from a clump of acacia thorns. His body had shifted some time after the goat scattered, dragged itself with clear effort away from the clearing and into what little shade there was. He lay on his side, flank rising faintly, eyes barely open. His breathing was steady but thin, the kind that spoke more of weariness than illness. His mane barely stirred in the wind, strands stuck to the wounds beneath it. One of the rangers crouched near the thorn bush without approaching fully. From a short distance, everything became clearer. The blood-streaked foreleg, the deep tear across the right front paw, the way his upper lip hung loose. The lion's face was slack, mouth slightly open. It revealed a strange absence. The upper canines were gone. Not broken, not chipped, gone. The gums where they should have been were smooth and pink with ridges barely healed. The others watched in silence. None had seen that before. Not like this. A lion with no roar and no bite. They stayed back. One ranger clicked softly against his teeth, a rhythmic sound more for communication than comfort. The lion didn't flinch. He blinked once, then again, slowly, as if unsure whether to sleep or keep watching. The boy from earlier had returned. He stood a few paces behind the rangers, holding nothing now, just his own arms crossed loosely over his chest. One of the men glanced back and signaled for him to stay behind, but the boy spoke anyway, his voice small and almost ashamed to interrupt. "He didn't want to bite," he said. "He just looked tired." The words held in the space between thorn and breath. One of the rangers nodded once, slowly. Tranquilizer was not a first resort. But here, it was a kindness. They prepared the dart with quiet, practiced movement. No sudden gestures, no commands shouted. A long pause followed. The ranger who carried the air rifle stepped forward just enough. The others held still. The lion's eyes opened a little wider, his ears shifting slightly at the sound of movement. But he didn't rise. He didn't growl. He watched. The soft hiss of the dart followed. It landed just above the haunch, clean. The lion twitched, lifted his head briefly, and then let it fall again, heavier this time. His ribs moved slower, the breath growing shallow. He did not fight it. It took minutes, not seconds. The team waited until the breath was deep and even, not vanished, just safely sedated. Only then did they approach. One ranger touched the back of his paw with gloved fingers. The torn pad was swollen, raw, and lined with sand. Whatever injury had caused it wasn't recent. It had reopened, likely from walking too far for too long. A stretch of silence held as they examined the rest. Scars traced the back and flank. The tail had a healed break near the end. He was an old male, likely once dominant, now thinned by time and exile. The absence of canines suggested something unnatural. Perhaps a failed poaching attempt, perhaps disease, or a fight gone worse than usual. But there was no collar, no tag. He wasn't tracked. He'd come alone. They worked quickly, but with care. A wide stretcher was laid out beside him, and 4 men moved together to roll his weight gently onto the canvas. His body didn't resist. It only shifted slightly as gravity took him. They secured his limbs loosely, covered his face with a cloth to shield his eyes from the lowering sun, and lifted. The vehicle was not far, just beyond the ridge. As they carried him, the boy walked behind them until one of the rangers knelt and met him at eye level. He placed a hand briefly on the boy's shoulder and pointed toward the village edge. The boy nodded. He said nothing more. His eyes followed the stretcher until it vanished behind the scrub. Then he turned away, walking back the way he'd come. The lion was laid gently in the back of the vehicle, canvas secured, water sprinkled across his spine to cool his body during transport. As the engine started, a soft groan escaped his throat. Not pain, not panic, just sound. The team drove eastward toward the outpost, toward shaded pens and medical care, leaving behind the dry curve of land where a predator had once stood among goats and done nothing but wait. The dust trailed behind them in a slow plume, fading before it reached the place where the lion had first lowered his head and surrendered to the heat. The outpost stood quiet under the weight of a deepening dusk. Long before stars emerged, the heat had begun to pull away from the ground in steady waves, leaving the air thick and still. Inside the low wooden enclosure at the far edge of the compound, the lion lay on a worn canvas mat that smelled of iodine and dry grass. His breath came slow, ribs rising unevenly as the sedation faded by degrees, replaced not by strength but by awareness. One eye remained shut. The other fluttered open now and then, pale and rimmed with red. The holding pen had been prepared in silence. Fresh bedding had been scattered in the corner, though the lion had not moved to reach it. Buckets of water stood along the fence wall, untouched. Insects hovered in small swarms above the lantern posts, drawn by low, flickering light. The rangers spoke softly, mostly in glances and nods. When it came to creatures like this, creatures who had already crossed some unknown threshold between wilderness and surrender, noise was never welcome. He had not stirred during transport, not even when the vehicle rocked through the dry gullies. But now, laid beneath a roof of reeds and boards, the lion blinked twice and turned his head a few inches, muzzle pressing into the mat like it no longer knew what it rested on. A ranger stepped into the pen, barefoot, moving as if across fragile ice. He carried a wide, shallow metal bowl. The water inside it was not cold. The well had warmed it, but it was clear and still. He crouched beside the lion's flank, just near the arc of his outstretched front legs, and placed the bowl without sound. The lion did not startle. He did not retreat, but his nose twitched once, then again. The ranger waited, hands resting on his knees, eyes low. A full minute passed. 2. Then, with a movement barely visible in the dim light, the lion's head turned slightly toward the scent. His mouth parted. Not a growl, just an open breath. His tongue reached forward, trembled, and grazed the surface of the water. Just once. Enough to move the top layer to send a ripple that caught the lantern glow. He pulled back. The ranger exhaled. Not relief, just presence. Another ranger watched from outside the pen, leaning quietly against the fence. He marked the time. They'd seen lions drink desperately. They'd seen others never try. This was something else. Not strength returning, but the memory of it. In the quiet that followed, the lion lowered his head again, resting his chin on the inside of one foreleg. His eyes remained open, but unfocused. The tongue did not reach again. The ranger moved back, standing slowly, and left the bowl untouched. The water would remain there until morning. A light cloth was draped across the pen's southern edge to shield from wind. No gate was slammed. No rope was pulled taut. The night would be as soft as they could make it. Inside the ranger's shelter, no one spoke loudly. The logbook was opened and filled in with calm precision. Adult male, upper canines missing, limp severe in front right, minor healed trauma to flank and tail, signs of dehydration, minimal aggression response, behavior withdrawn, alert. There was a pause before the final line was written. Then, no resistance to human proximity, drinking response faint. Outside, the lanterns burned lower. The wind had not returned. The goats from the nearby hills had long been penned away for the night, but somewhere in the distance a dog barked. Not an alarm, just to break the quiet. Insects whispered against the canvas walls. The ranger returned to the pen one last time before sleep. The lion hadn't moved. His chest rose and fell slowly, but the bowl's surface showed one more ripple, a faint circle from a second touch. The ranger noticed it and nodded once, to no one. He laid his mat just outside the pen's gate, near the fence where dust collected in small piles against the posts. He didn't remove his boots, just leaned back on the canvas, hands beneath his head, and closed his eyes beneath the open night. Inside the pen, the lion shifted once more. A hind leg kicked lightly in the sand, then stilled. The breath continued, shallow but steady. No chains, no noise, no sedatives left to wear off. Only time now, and whatever memory remained in him of cool water, of quiet movement, of something worth walking toward. A breeze lifted just before dawn. It rolled across the compound, gentle and dry, stirring the fringe of the ranger's mat, slipping through the fence slats and brushing over the lion's mane like a hand too light to wake him. The bowl sat nearby, half full. The ripples had long gone still. By the time the sun lifted fully over the outpost, the pen had begun to warm again. The wind had shifted sometime in the early morning, bringing with it a silence that felt different than the night before. Lighter, but expectant. The ranger who had slept near the enclosure stirred first. His blanket was damp with dew, and the dust beneath him had settled in a fine, rippled layer across the soles of his boots. He sat up slowly, rubbing the back of his neck, and glanced toward the lion's pen before standing. The lion was still there, lying in nearly the same position as before, head turned slightly inward, limbs loose but curled under the weight of sleep or stillness. But there was a difference. His tail, which had lain motionless for 2 nights, now twitched once against the canvas. A pause, then again. It wasn't a sign of strength, but it was something. The ranger stepped to the pen and leaned on the outer fence, letting his eyes adjust to the thin gold light spreading across the ground. That's when he saw them. Not inside the pen. Outside it. Just past the gate, in a shallow curve of dust where the wind had died early, the tracks appeared. They were clean. 4 paw prints, fresh and sharp-edged, pressed into the earth like a signature. Not large, not as wide or deep as the ones that had trailed the lion from the Goat Valley. These were smaller, lighter, and close enough to the fence that they stopped him in place. He followed them with his eyes. The prints circled halfway around the pen, arcing toward the side where the lion lay closest to the wall. Then they vanished where the brush began, where dry grass met the edge of the boundary path. No drag marks, no signs of panic, just a loop, an approach, and a retreat. He didn't call the others right away. Instead, he crouched near the tracks and looked back at the lion. The old male had shifted again, barely. One foreleg extended further than before. His nose rested near the mat and his eyes were open, glinting faintly in the angled morning light. For the first time since his arrival, he seemed to be watching something, not just surviving it. When the other rangers emerged, one carrying a tin cup of cooled tea, the first ranger raised a hand to still them. He pointed at the dust, then walked the curve of the tracks again. Careful not to step inside them, they gathered slowly, saying nothing. A younger ranger knelt beside the last print and touched its edge with his fingertip. The shape was unmistakable. Another lion, a female. She hadn't come to the pen. She hadn't growled or challenged. but she had come close enough to smell him, close enough to listen. Inside, the lion lifted his head. It rose no more than a few inches, trembling under its own weight, but he did it. Slowly, stiffly. The rangers froze. His eyes scanned toward the brush, not the men. He held the gaze there, steady, as if something remained in the dust beyond them. One of the men whispered under his breath. Not a word of surprise. More a breath released through thought. The lion's ears tilted backward at the sound, but he didn't lower his head. His nostrils flared once, twice. They couldn't know what had passed between them. If anything had, there had been no camera to capture the moment, no eyes watching through the hours between dusk and dawn. But the prince told the story. She had come, walked the arc around him, and left again. Her presence marked not in sound, but in the earth she pressed. The lion held his head up for nearly a minute, then let it fall again with care. Not like before, not in collapse, but in rest. The difference was slight, but they saw it. That day the team worked quietly. One ranger cleaned the lion's wound while another refreshed the bowl, adding water from the same well, cool and clear. The lion did not resist. His body still bore the tension of exhaustion, but no longer the dull weight of collapse. He blinked more often. He lifted a hind leg when touched, and once, briefly, he moved it. Near the enclosure, one ranger laid a second canvas square along the shade line. It was unnecessary, but something about the gesture made sense. The lion didn't shift toward it, but his tail did, dragging slowly like the idea of movement had begun to form again. By late afternoon, the prints outside had faded slightly under the breeze, but they remained visible enough to trace. The youngest of the team walked the perimeter twice, scanning for others. No additional tracks appeared. Just the four, neat and curved like a path drawn with thought. Inside the pen, the lion rose onto one foreleg and held there, breathing hard, jaw slightly open. He didn't stand, but he stayed up, watching the trees. His gaze no longer wandered. It held. That evening, when the sun dipped behind the far ridge and the light turned copper across the ground, the lion made a low sound. Not a roar, not even a growl, just a vibration, deep in the throat, almost too soft to name. The ranger who sat outside the gate heard it. He didn't move. He just waited until the sound faded, then whispered something meant more for himself than for the lion. She was here. That night, no other tracks appeared. No other lions came. But the space outside the fence felt changed. Not empty, just paused. The wind carried dust across the old prints, filling them slowly, one grain at a time, but the memory of them remained. And inside, the lion slept again, his head closer to the wall now, angled in the direction of where she'd stood. They waited 5 more days. Not because he couldn't walk, but because walking wasn't enough. A lion doesn't return to open land unless something inside him is ready. Not just his legs, but his sense of place. The wounds had sealed. The torn paw pad remained thick with scar tissue, and the muscles along his right flank still trembled after each slow step. But he stood now without falling. He drank more than a mouthful. And on the 6th morning, he walked to the gate of his pen and stayed there, not pacing, not pressed to escape, just still, facing outward. The rangers spoke a few words that day. The plan had already formed. They would take him back, not to the danger, but to the curve of land near the valley where he'd laid down in the dust and waited without teeth, without force. It wasn't where he'd nearly died. It was where something else had begun. They moved before the sun crested. The lion was guided into the same transport crate, not with ropes, not with force, but with time. He stepped in slowly, lured by nothing, driven by nothing. A quiet that bordered on reverence followed every motion. When the gates latched, he did not protest. He lay down, breath steady, eyes closed against the new wind. The truck rumbled gently across the dry flats, back toward the village edge where goats had once frozen in place. As they approached, the sky darkened with the red gold of late afternoon. The path bent around a narrow ridge and spilled into the same clearing where dust had once parted around a swaying frame of ribs and fur. The goats were out again, spread loosely across the slope. They shifted as the vehicle approached but didn't scatter. Not yet. One of the older boys stood watch near the path, a crooked stick in hand, just like before. He squinted at the truck as it slowed, eyes narrowing, not in fear, but in memory. The crate was lowered gently onto the earth. There was no crowd. Just 2 rangers, the boy, and a sweep of silent hills. They unlatched the side panel and stepped back. For a long while, nothing moved. Then, a paw. It extended slowly, pressing down into the same red soil that had once held him upright through weakness. His body followed, deliberate, shaking slightly as weight passed through limbs that had known stillness too long. He stepped out fully. Lean, quiet, not proud, just present. The goats turned sharply, eyes wide, legs frozen. A ripple passed through the herd. Some backed away. Some didn't move. None bleated. The lion didn't look at them. He faced the far side of the valley where a wind stirred the tall grass in slow waves. His ears twitched. His nose lifted slightly. A minute passed. Then 2. Movement. From behind the line of brush, a second lion appeared. She was thinner than the first. Younger, smaller, but no longer unsure. Her body curved low as she stepped from cover, not stalking, not afraid, just arriving. She moved toward him in a wide arc, just like the one traced outside the pen. Not straight, not fast. The herd shifted again, hooves tapping nervously against the stones. But still, no sound of panic. She came within 3 paces of him and stopped. Her tail swept once behind her. The older lion turned his head toward her, then toward the brush she'd come from. His body leaned slightly to one side, not from injury now, but instinct. She closed the space, 2 more slow steps. Their shoulders nearly touched. Neither one growled, neither one bowed. He blinked once, slowly. Then they moved. Not into the goats, not toward the path. They turned together toward the far end of the valley, walking side by side, limping, light and quiet. The wind picked up faint dust behind them. Their tracks left a double trail in the soft earth, 2 sets of prints layered in time. The goats stayed frozen, a living sculpture of still eyes and ears. The herder boy stepped forward but didn't shout. He only watched. From the ridge, the rangers stood still. No orders, no calls, just quiet watching. The pair of lions reached the tall grass and did not pause. The brush opened, swallowed them, and closed again. Nothing rushed, no warning. Just the hush that follows a question finally answered. And then, stillness. The valley held its breath. The dust settled once more. Only the wind remained, curling gently through the path the lions had carved and lifting over the goats that had never been harmed. The sun dipped below the far ridge, casting long shadows across the plain. One set from the boy, another from the ranger beside him, and in the distance, fading now, the faint echo of 2 more, side by side, swallowed by the land that had once watched them fall apart and now welcomed their return.